The young guardsman's name was Thomas, and for the past 11 months, his world had revolved around the polished floors and gilded halls of Kensington Palace. He was one of the many faceless sentinels, a fixture in a bearskin hat and a crisp red tunic, whose job it was to stand perfectly still and blend into the ornate wallpaper. His post was often in the long, quiet corridor that led to the private apartments of the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge and their 3 children. It was a posting of high honor, but one of profound solitude. He would watch the household staff bustle past with baskets of laundry and silver trays, hear the distant bark of a dog, and feel the subtle shift in air pressure when a heavy exterior door was opened somewhere in the vast building. He saw the royals in flashes, the Duke striding purposefully towards his office, the Duchess gliding past with a warm, fleeting smile for the staff. But the one he watched for, the one whose schedule he had unconsciously memorized, was Princess Charlotte. She was a whirlwind of energy, a small comet with bright blue eyes and a laugh that could, on a quiet afternoon, echo all the way down to his end of the corridor. He would hear her before he saw her, the rapid patter of small shoes on the hard wood, the excited chatter directed at a nanny or a toy. As she passed his post, she would often offer a solemn little nod, and a gesture of acknowledgement she had clearly learned from watching her mother. Sometimes, if she was in a particularly good mood, she would give a tiny, almost imperceptible wave, her fingers wiggling by her hip so her parents wouldn't see. Thomas was forbidden from reacting, of course. A royal guard does not smile, does not wave, does not acknowledge the existence of anyone, no matter how small or charming. But behind the stoic mask of his face, Thomas's heart would lift. And those little waves were the highlight of his otherwise monotonous shifts. They were a secret, a tiny human connection in a world of strict protocol. One Tuesday afternoon in late September, the quality of the light in the corridor changed. The sun, low in the sky, cast long, golden shadows. Thomas was nearing the end of his 4-hour shift, his feet aching in their polished boots, his mind drifting towards the barracks and a well-earned cup of tea. He heard the familiar patter of feet, but this time it was different. It was faster, a frantic, uneven scuffle rather than a happy trot. He held his position, eyes fixed on a point on the opposite wall. From his peripheral vision, he saw a small figure burst around the corner and stop abruptly. It was Princess Charlotte, but she was not the composed little girl who offered him nods. Her face was flushed a deep, mottled red. Her usually neat hair had escaped its ponytail, with strands sticking to her tear-streaked cheeks. She was breathing in great heaving sobs, her small shoulders shaking violently. She wasn't carrying a doll or a book. Her hands were empty, and they were clenched into tiny, white-knuckled fists at her sides. For a second, the corridor was suspended in an unnatural silence, broken only by her choked gasps for air. Thomas's training screamed at him to remain still, to see nothing, to be a piece of the furniture. But everything human in him screamed louder. Thus he had never seen a child look so utterly devastated. She wasn't just crying, she looked wounded, betrayed. Then she did something that shattered every rule in the guard's handbook. Instead of running towards her parents' apartments, she ran towards him. She crossed the wide corridor in a few short, stumbling steps and stopped directly in front of him, so close he could see the individual tears clinging to her eyelashes. She tilted her head back, her small and tear-stained face looking up into his. She didn't seem to see a guardsman. She saw a human being, a safe pair of eyes in a world that had just hurt her. He heard a distant voice, a nanny's voice, calling her name from the direction she'd come. "Charlotte! Charlotte, where have you gone? Come back here this instant!" Charlotte flinched at the sound. She looked back over her shoulder, a fresh wave of fear crossing her features. Then she turned back to Thomas. She reached out a small, untrembling hand and placed it, palm flat, against the cool brass buckle of his belt. It was the only part of him she could reach. "Guardsman," she whispered, her voice thick and small. It was the first time she had ever spoken to him directly. Thomas's jaw tightened. He gave a single, tiny, disobedient blink of acknowledgement. He couldn't speak, he couldn't move, but he could let her know he was listening. She took a shuddering breath. "My heart hurts." The words were so simple and so profoundly sad that they pierced the last of his professional detachment. He forgot about the Queen, the country, the uniform. He only saw a little girl in pain. The nanny's voice was getting closer, sharper. "Charlotte, this is very naughty." Charlotte's grip on his belt buckle tightened. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a fearful, conspiratorial whisper. "It was William." The name didn't register at first. His brain was stuck on protocol, on the impending arrival of the nanny, on the utter impossibility of this situation. Then it hit him with the force of a physical blow. William. Prince William. The Duke of Cambridge. Her father. His heart, which had been racing with anxiety, seemed to stutter and then stop altogether. The air in his lungs turned to ice. He stared down at the top of her head, his mind reeling, refusing to process the information. Had he misheard? Had she said someone else? A friend? A cousin? But no, so her voice had been clear, the name distinct. William. Before he could even begin to form a coherent thought, the nanny, a flustered woman in a blue uniform, rounded the corner. Her face was a mixture of relief and annoyance. "There you are. My goodness, child, you gave me such a fright. Running off like that, come along now." She didn't even look at Thomas. She simply took Charlotte's hand, gently but firmly prying her fingers from his belt buckle. Charlotte didn't resist. She let herself be led away, but as she was pulled back towards the direction of the nursery, she turned her head and looked back at him. Her eyes, still swimming with tears, held a look of such profound sadness and confusion that it felt like an accusation. She had trusted him with her secret, with the source of her pain, and now she was being led away, alone. Thomas stood frozen, a statue carved from shock. The corridor, which had been so full of tension, was now silent again. And the nanny's footsteps and Charlotte's smaller ones faded away, swallowed by the vastness of the palace. He was left alone with the echo of those 3 words. It was William. The remaining 20 minutes of his shift were a blur. His body went through the motions, standing perfectly still, but his mind was a tempest. He replayed the scene over and over, the frantic running, the heaving sobs, the trembling hand on his belt, the whispered confession. He tried to rationalize it, and perhaps she'd had a nightmare and her father was in it. Perhaps he had told her off for something, a minor telling off that had seemed like the end of the world to a sensitive 5-year-old. Perhaps it was a misunderstanding. He clung to these explanations, desperate to make the awful truth go away. But the image of her face, that look of betrayal, wouldn't leave him. This wasn't the pout of a child who'd been told she couldn't have a biscuit. This was the look of someone whose trust had been shattered. He knew with a chilling certainty that what he had witnessed was real. The pain in her eyes was unmistakable. As soon as he was relieved, he walked back to the guard room on autopilot. His colleagues chatted around him, their voices a distant hum. He changed out of his uniform in a daze, his hands moving mechanically. He was a man carrying a live grenade, and he had no idea where to dispose of it. That night, lying in his narrow barracks bed, he stared at the ceiling. The story had to go somewhere. It was a poison inside him. He thought of his superior officers. Could he report it? Report what exactly? That a distressed child had said her father's name? He would be laughed out of the regiment. He would be disciplined for breaking protocol, for engaging with a royal, for listening to a child's tattle. The palace was a fortress of reputation, and he was a mere foot soldier. He would be crushed. And he thought of the press. The tabloids would pay a fortune for a story like this. The headline, "Guardsman, Princess Charlotte told me her father hurt her," would sell millions. He could be rich, set for life. He could disappear. But the thought made him physically ill. To see that little girl's pain splashed across the front of a newspaper, to have her private agony dissected by the world, to make her a pawn in a media frenzy, he couldn't do it. He would rather die. He had taken an oath, and not just to the Queen, but to protect the royal family. But how did you protect them from themselves? The following days were a torment. He requested a change of shift, a transfer to a gatehouse, anything to avoid that corridor. His request was denied. So he stood there day after day, his heart hammering in his chest every time he heard the patter of small feet. He saw Charlotte a few times. She would walk past with her nanny, but she was different. The light had gone out of her. She walked with her head down, her shoulders slumped. She never looked at him. It was as if that moment of shared truth had never happened, or worse, as if she had been told to forget it, to forget him. He watched the Duke of Cambridge with new, horrified eyes. He saw him interact with his children in the palace gardens, playing football, swinging them around. He looked like a doting father. The cognitive dissonance was maddening. And how could the man laughing with his son be the same man who made his daughter's heart hurt? What had he done? A harsh word? A moment of frustration? Or something darker, something that made Thomas's blood run cold every time he considered it? The burden of the secret began to change him. He became withdrawn, jumpy. He stopped going to the pub with the other lads. He lost his appetite. He was living with a constant, low-grade fever of anxiety, and he felt a crushing sense of responsibility for a little girl he was forbidden to speak to. He was her silent, uniformed guardian angel, and he was failing her. Then, one blustery October afternoon, he got his answer. He was on duty in the main entrance hall, a temporary posting while the usual guard was away. The large oak doors were open, letting in a gust of cool air. A sleek black Range Rover pulled up on the gravel outside. The Duke of Cambridge stepped out, looking windswept and informal in a sweater and jeans. He was alone. He strode through the entrance, his mind clearly elsewhere, and headed for the grand staircase. As he passed, he nodded curtly at Thomas, a brief automatic gesture. Thomas returned a perfect salute, his face a mask of stone. But as the Duke's foot touched the first step, a voice rang out from the top of the staircase. "Papa!" It was Charlotte. She was standing at the top of the stairs, dressed in her pajamas, clutching a stuffed rabbit. Her face, which had been so blank for weeks, was lit with a tentative, hopeful smile. The Duke stopped and looked up. His own face broke into a warm, genuine smile. "Hello, my Charlotte. What are you doing out of bed?" He started to walk up the stairs towards her, his arms opening for a hug. And then Thomas saw it. As her father ascended, Charlotte flinched. It was tiny, almost imperceptible. A micro-expression of fear that flashed across her features and was gone in an instant, replaced by the smile. She held her ground, but her little body had tensed. She let her father scoop her up and hug her, but Thomas saw her arms go around his neck a beat too late, and they didn't squeeze. They just rested there, limp. The Duke kissed her cheek, said something soft and soothing, and carried her back up the stairs, disappearing from view. The entire interaction lasted 10 seconds. But for Thomas, it was the final, damning piece of evidence. It wasn't a one-time event. It wasn't a misunderstanding. The fear in that tiny flinch was deep-seated and real. The child was afraid of her own father. He stood in the hall, the grandeur of the palace pressing in on him, and felt utterly, hopelessly alone. He knew the truth. He had seen it with his own eyes, heard it with his own ears. But he was trapped. The secret sat in his chest, a hot, heavy stone. And he knew with a dreadful certainty that it would be there for the rest of his life. The royal guard's heart had stopped the moment Princess Charlotte had spoken, and it would never truly beat the same way again. He was no longer just a guardsman. He was the keeper of a terrible silent truth, a truth buried in the gilded heart of the palace, a truth that would never be told.